Warren Buffett is a super nice guy, and he has absolutely no interest in offending people. But if you look at what he's doing, he is as bearish as he ever gets.
Hi Team Value, JJ here, welcome back. Well, the Berkshire annual meeting's just been. Yesterday I made a video about some of what Buffett said about this huge cash pile of nearly $200 billion that they've got. They've been selling some of their Apple. Today I'm going to react to an investor who says he thinks that Buffett is as bearish as he's ever been. So let's get into it.
I want to begin by asking you, how did Mr. Buffett strike you? It was a weekend of some sentimentality, maybe some melancholy, as Charlie Munger, his longtime compatriot, was remembered. How did Mr. Buffett strike you?
Well, he has been such a generous and brilliant and wise man in my life that there's hardly anything he can do that disappoints me. He's 93 years old. He just had his closest friend and his closest business confidant pass, and he's feeling the effects of that. And Charlie, they started the meeting out with a bunch of Charlie witticisms of the past years, and you couldn't help but be emotional about it. It's really the end of an era.
I think that's true, although I did notice that Buffett was pretty upbeat. He was pretty upbeat, more upbeat than I thought he was going to be. There was a remembering of Charlie. I've seen a few people there saying that it was the best one that they've been to for a few years, even though Charlie wasn't there, because there were tributes to Charlie. But also, he did seem pretty energetic for, during the pandemic there was one year there where he'd seemed really downbeat, really sort of sullen, and this year he didn't seem like that. I think he enjoys this event, definitely enjoys it, having that audience, and even though Charlie wasn't there, I think he seemed in high spirits.
It was clear in some of the sort of subtext that Greg Abel is assuming a more important role internally. He's the designated successor. Did you feel that way?
Oh, yeah. He will be the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, the primary asset allocator among buying whole companies versus putting more toward stocks, et cetera, which was kind of a surprise to us. We thought the last 10 years or so would be a process of turning more of the reins in company selection to Todd Combs and Ted Weschler. And that explains why they haven't been given a more prominent position at the annual meeting. We wondered about that the last 3 or 4 years, and we got that question answered for us.
Todd and Ted, of course, do quite a bit of investing. They do have several $1 billion, or I'm not sure exactly how much, but an allocation of billions that they are allowed to invest in. Buffett said that he doesn't have to okay their investments. But really it is Greg Abel that's going to be the CEO. And Buffett mentioned that he hopes it's not going to be in too short of a time frame, but he is well into his 90s now. He mentioned 5 or 6 years that he hoped he'll still be around. He did say that he thinks that the company will be in good hands with Greg, and he was prominent here in Charlie's position. There was a point there where Buffett turned and said Charlie after a question, and it was Greg, and that was a kind of emotional moment, really.
But I don't regard Utah as being unfriendly to the idea of utilities being treated fairly. Charlie? Charlie, I'm so used to it. I had actually checked myself a couple times already, but I'll slip again.
That's a great honor, Warren.
Now, this is the second video I've made about this year's meeting. Last video, if you want to see, I went through some clips of Buffett talking about Apple and talking about Berkshire and talking about the market at the moment.
But it will be a different company. It's a wonderful, large conglomerate that is closely tied to the United States economy. And if you want a wonderful company closely tied to the United States economy, it'll be a good investment for you the next 10 years.
And of course, we should not even suggest that Mr. Buffett is anywhere close to finished yet. He is an amazing leader, amazing stamina, and of course is still fully in charge here.
Well, he is well into his 90s, so he doesn't really have that long to go. But there's even been a book written about Berkshire beyond Buffett. I'll put that in the description if you want to take a look at that. And also, while I'm talking of books, this one here is really the book to read on Buffett, the Essays of Warren Buffett. I've got this in audio and in paper book form. It's really all of the things, or many of the things that he said, and categorized into different sections about different topics. If you haven't read that already, I'd definitely recommend doing that, and I'll put a link to that in the description as well.
So let's talk about their big cash pile, $180-some billion, heading to $200 billion. What should they do with it? There is some discussion. Would you, as a shareholder, like to see them pay a dividend? Or would you like to see them make a big acquisition? Or would you like to see them buy back shares?
We have no interest in the dividend. It's fine to have them buy back shares.
Buffett's talked about this over the years. I mean, they're not interested in a dividend. He's talked about dividends not being great in terms of cash allocation. He'd rather buy back shares if the shares are trading below intrinsic value, buying back shares, decreasing the share count. And he said that in the video that I made yesterday. He talked about this. The goal of Berkshire is to increase operating earnings and to decrease the share count at the same time. And of course, that can boost the share price and the value of the company over time. A dividend, if you know anything about Berkshire Hathaway, it would be very surprising if they issued a dividend ever. They'd have to run out of ideas for new investments. They have got a huge cash pile, but they will probably spend it. If there's something like the global financial crisis, they could actually spend that fairly quickly if there were some big investments, in my opinion, that they could go into, even buying substantial amounts of massive companies. If you're getting value out of this Warren Buffett episode so far, I'd really appreciate it if you remember to smash that like button to help the algorithm to spread it to more people. Thanks.
You always have to think about Berkshire Hathaway, do as I do, not as I say. Because Warren Buffett is a super nice guy, and he has absolutely no interest in offending people. But if you look at what he's doing, he is as bearish as he ever gets. I read right between the lines, right from the beginning at the meeting on Saturday. I was there sitting in the audience, and I thought, okay, huge cash position, trimmed his Apple position. He's nibbling on something below the surface they haven't announced yet. But basically, he is waiting until the next 40% decline in the stock market to apply massive amounts of capital at bargain prices in things that are large enough to be meaningful to this company at the size it is now.
Well, that's debatable, but again, I did pick that up myself. In yesterday's video, there were quite a lot of quotes from him. He was talking about things being expensive, giving the impression that the market was pretty expensive, or that it wasn't the right time, they couldn't find anything to buy. As he said there, reading between the lines, it did get that impression that they were in no hurry to spend their massive cash pile. It'd soon be over $200 billion if they hold on to it, just because of the amount of cash coming into Berkshire. But you do get the feeling that they're waiting for something, a big event in the market where they could go in distressed situations. And really, it's the only way that they can spend that much money. They've got such a small pool of companies that they can look at and invest in. Some of the world's biggest companies. Recently, he was in Japan buying up there, taking advantage of the cheaper prices there. But I think this guy's right in terms of waiting for a big opportunity. It's really the only choice they've got. Buffett did say that interest rates are pretty high, so he doesn't mind holding on to the cash either at the moment. Excuse me, just pausing to have a sip of coffee made with my AeroPress coffee maker, which I highly recommend. I do own shares in the company with a controlling interest in AeroPress, which is Tiny Limited. I've made videos about Tiny before, but I wouldn't recommend anything that I don't truly love the product, and this makes fantastic coffee. I'm going to leave a link in the description to the Amazon store if you want to check that out. Don't take my word for it. There are so many great recommendations of the product. Just read through them, and it's not expensive for what it is.
So you just used the phrase, this is as bearish, I believe you said, as I have ever seen him. Is that really the right characterization, or is it rather that he thinks the market is too highly priced for him to go in a big way and put fresh capital to work? In other words, is it so much a bearish call as it is a rejection of the idea that this is an opportunistic time to invest?
Tyler, you have asked a great question. So I'm going to answer this in kind of an odd way. In 1969, he pivoted from being primarily a quantitative Ben Graham value guy to being more of a Charlie Munger qualitative guy, right? Get a reasonable price on a great company. And he said back in 67, 68, 69 that the quantitative ideas that he used to like to buy were combed and recombed. That was his letter to partners. And this last year, he said that the kind of things that we would like to do have been endlessly picked over. So that is code for we think the market's expensive. We're not in any hurry. We're going to wait. And remember, he's talked constantly for 10 to 15 years that the bigger Berkshire gets, the more it limits their opportunities. Right. So really, to have very large opportunities for large deployments of that $200 billion, you've got to have the entire market get into very difficult circumstances.
Well, I think that's correct. You know, to deploy that much money, as I said, they really need something big in the market to have a massive drawdown, companies to get into distress. And as Buffett puts it, the phone isn't really ringing very much. You know, in times of stress, say the global financial crisis, there were people ringing him to ask them for loans or to help them out, to bail them out, even massive companies. So that's really what they need. The interviewer was correct here in saying, I don't think he's exactly bearish, but he does obviously think that the market's too expensive if they're not deploying cash really. But they have been making some acquisitions in traditional energy and oil and a few other things. But really, they don't have the opportunity to deploy that much money, and it's a massive amount. So we'll have to see what happens. And Buffett did indicate that again in yesterday's video. We saw him talking about, that things could change. He did hint that things could change, but he doesn't know. He doesn't know what's going to happen in the macro, but he does know that there aren't some great opportunities to deploy that amount of capital at the moment. He did say that if he had $10 million, he'd be able to deploy it more easily because there are some small opportunities. And for retail investors, that's the case. It's just a totally different situation if you're deploying billions and over 100 billion, nearly 200 billion. It's a totally different story. Really few opportunities there. Now, although I do follow Warren Buffett and what he says and what he's written throughout his life and the interviews that he gives, everything he says really, I don't own Berkshire Hathaway stock, but I do own a mini Berkshire instead. As I've said on many occasions, I like smaller companies, smaller stocks, small caps, and so there are a few mini Berkshires out there, or baby Berkshires as they're called, and I do own one of those. My Patreon members know what that is. Now, I'm going to put a link to yesterday's Warren Buffett video if you haven't seen that yet. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to put a video there of what YouTube thinks that you in particular should watch next. So go and see any of those now if you want to. And thanks to everybody for watching or listening wherever you're doing that. And I'll see you in the next one.